We're back and we're here to talk about suspension. All right. You saw, hopefully, a couple videos ago, we got the back done, the leaf springs underneath it, the rear suspension kind of buttoned up. I've got some pieces maybe we'll talk about here at the end of this video on how I'm gonna fix and adjust the stance. But today, the biggest part we're gonna focus on is this front suspension. And what we've done here, what I've done, is I used the high pinion Dana 30 out of the Jeep Cherokee, which should be a plenty strong axle. I'm only running a 35-inch tire, so it's 35, 12.5, 15s. These bad boys, brand new to me, brand new to me, and I'm so pumped about them. Again, just on a budget build, I found these used out of Tulsa, so I drove over, picked them up, $900 for a set of 5, only a few years old, and then I was able to sell those old Icon wheels as well. Sold those for $400, so far I'm $100 a tire and wheel, and I think that is a phenomenal deal. It's keeping me really well on budget. It's helping me mock everything up, and what we'll see here in a little bit is if this actually clears. I have yet to actually cycle the suspension with the appropriate size tire because I didn't have anything for mock-up. Now that we have an idea of what suspension I'm using, the drivetrain selection, let's go through what we'll cover in today's video. We're gonna cover design. We're gonna talk about the parts used, the installation, some of the problems to think about and what to cover when putting everything into place, and then finally, how we kept it cheap. I'm gonna talk about all the different design. So I've used a 3-link with a Panhard bar is my suspension design. I've kept all the mounting points on the axle exactly the same as they would have been originally, and then had to adjust the frame mounting points to where they would fit. These Jeepster frames are really narrow, so making all the packaging work, I had to do a little bit of tricks to get that to work, so you'll see that coming up. And then some other, I think, pretty neat little things I did reusing some of the other Cherokee parts and some different ways that I actually made this front suspension adjustable for ride height, so that way I can kind of tune it in before I actually spend big money on nice new front coil springs. I really want to try to get everything done, again, as cheap as possible and make sure that it works well. So let's dive in. When it came to suspension design, I really tried to stick with just a few general guidelines. I reached out to another Jeepster guy who's built a lot of really cool Jeepsters and made sure that all my numbers in the 3-link calculator looked correct. But the 3 things I really tried to focus on was that the upper control arm length was 75% of the lower control arm length. We had a vertical separation of 25% of the tire diameter, and that I tried to get as much triangulation as possible. And so after messing with the 3-link calculator a little bit, you can see here I was able to achieve a 65% anti-squat, which I felt was really good, and that's what I was recommended to try to shoot for. And so in doing that and messing with the numbers, keeping the stock geometry on the Dana 30 and using the constraints that were available with the stock Jeepster Commando frame, I was really happy with these numbers and think it was the best that I could do. And then again, made the upper control arm adjustable so that very top pin gives me a 65% anti-squat, the middle pin gives me like a 75-80%, and the bottom gives me right at about 100. And so I'm not going to go into a whole lot what all the different numbers mean and those types of things, but I wanted to share this information in case it was something that you were looking for. And there's lots of really good videos out there that explain all the different theory and suspension design, but I really just wanted to kind of show you what I did and some of the key takeaways that I focused on. So another thing that's important to note on your 3-link design is that you want your track bar and your steering to be at both roughly the same angle and roughly the same length. And so that was another reason to change that pitman arm out from that drop pitman to the flat, is that we want both of those to be a really similar length and angle. And so in order to do that, that flat bar did achieve that. Having the 3 different mounting places on the frame side also allows for that. And so we have some adjustability, and we're really close. I think there's maybe an inch or 2 shorter in the track bar versus the drag link, and so everything's looking pretty good. I'm hoping it's going to handle really nicely on the road. But the drag link goes from here all the way up to about right there with the pitman arm, and then the track bar goes from this bolt all the way up to there with the track bar mount on the frame. So that kind of shows you, again, about same length, same angle. There you are. I didn't really want to move any of the axle side link mounts. And so those are actually all original where they're at, the high pinion Jeep Cherokee mounting points. So what's really nice with this too is going to be that if I ever wanted to swap out from a high pinion 30 to, you know, a Super Duty axle or, you know, any other axle out there, really, a lot of companies now are making, you know, Super Duty 1-ton axle to Jeep Cherokee axle trusses. And with that in mind, you could literally put one of those on that axle and then roll it under here and bolt it right up and away you'll go. So that part's really, really nice as far as this suspension design goes, is that the upgrading of the axles in the future should be really straightforward. Then a little bit of kind of the trickier pieces that we did for the axle side, it's all stock, it's all original. For the frame side, I had to make sure that the geometry worked appropriately with the stock mounting points. And so to do that, I really had to mess with that 3-link calculator where moving it, figuring out links and those types of things. And so to do that, I mounted one of the sides, the upper link, it has a 3-link adjustable. So the very top one gives me about 65% anti-squat, and then the very bottom one will give me right at about 100. And so I think that's gonna work out really nicely. The other thing as mentioned is I did make that upper link shorter than the lower link. And with that, that should then keep the caster correct through the suspension travel, which will make it handle a lot better, be really happy with the high pinion. I don't have to worry about pinion angle. I'm gonna have plenty of pinion angle the way all this is set up. And so that's where we are. Now let's show you where and how I mounted the upper links and lower links on the frame side mounting points. So for the upper link mounts, it's really close to the motor. I have scooted the motor a little bit off center just to try to get as much room as I could between the upper link and the motor and get that bolt in and out. Even then, I didn't have enough room to clear everything, so I had trimmed a little bit off the bell housing, and then I actually took that plate, cut a hole, and welded that into the inside of the frame, and then that allows that bolt to go straight through the mount and mount to the frame, get all nice and tight. And I actually started with a 10-degree upper link, and then by the time I kind of shaved it and trimmed it, the frame cuts back a little bit, and so that 10 degrees actually made it flush with where the rest of the frame rail goes. It fits up really nice and tight. On the lower links, there's actually 2 bolts up front for transmission crossmember and 2 bolts in the back for transmission crossmember. And so I use those front bolts of the transmission crossmember to actually drill holes through the lower links and get those bolted into place, and then all tacked up nice and neat. And then when I go ahead and pull the tub here in a little bit, in a few weeks, then I'll go ahead and finish weld all the uppers and lower links in completely, get them really nice and gusseted, get everything happy and in its final place. All right, so here we are. Suspension is in place, it's welded up, so I hope I did it correctly. I have cycled it. Originally I used some PVC links. I should have B-roll, we'll kind of show some of that, what it looked like, but used some PVC with an 1.5 inch inner diameter. I ended up having to slit it up so it compressed down on the actual link ends. Just use hose clamps, it holds it on place. Cycled everything through, thought everything was amazing, thought I had done everything completely correct. One of the things that is really important that I forgot to look for was actually clearance of the track bar bracket itself. So when I originally cycled it, I had the steering just like this, completely straight or completely forward. And so as you can kind of see, that also puts this drag link the furthest out it would ever be. And so I stuffed it up. This thing sat nice and clean all the way up here, cleared everything I would want, it, you know, full stuff, and then also articulated, everything cleared. It was great. I was happy, I was excited. I went to bed like most of us do, just thinking about things and problems, and I realized I hadn't checked the steering. So I came back out the next day, I turned this through, and as you can see now, this is substantially closer to where this track bar is mounted. And so when I did that, it no longer cleared, and so I had to cut all this track bar off, then re-weld it, move it, get it in place. So important piece, tack everything, cycle your steering both ways, you know, both sides, all the way up, all the way down, full droop, full stuff. Make sure everything's going to work and clear. Now that after I'd done that, I went ahead and installed this. Another problem that I actually ran into is I ordered the Barnes kit that was a mount outside of the frame track bar. Well, I'm reusing the stock track bar from the Jeep Cherokee, and so that actually didn't line up the way it needed to. It started bumping into the coil springs out here. If you're doing this on your own, I would recommend actually ordering an inside the frame mounted track bar bracket. And so I ended up cutting both the legs off. I ended up taking some plate, dimple dyeing, you know, making it look a little bit nicer nicer, welding that up, tying that in all the way up into the coil tower here. And then I also gusseted and plated the inside of that track bar, so that's gonna be really good. And then I think I'm also gonna go ahead and actually make a track bar support. So I'll take another Heim like this, and I'm gonna bolt it in at this top one and run it across all the way to the frame. So that's the track bar. That was some of the issues I ran into there. When cycling it, make sure again, cycle the full suspension, cycle the steering both ways, up, down, all the different ways you might think it could go, and make sure everything clears. The next piece that I wanted to do is at full stuff, the motor and the oil pan actually hang just enough below the frame that if it was actually at a full stuff on both sides, it would touch that oil pan. Again, I wanted to try to keep things as cheap as possible, so I just bought some thread-in bump stops, you know, just solid rubber, and screwed those into the frame. It does decrease about 2 inches of available up travel. So long term, I'll probably move these up and kind of up more to the side of the frame, get another inch of up travel or so, and should be really happy with that. Also, I do have some B-roll with the axle. We put a Barnes four-wheel drive truss all the way across the top. I originally was going to use a little bit different upper link mount, but I actually retained the stock upper link mount, and I used a Moto-built upper control arm bracket here. And so that welds up 1.75" DON tubing I already had laying around the house, didn't cost anything. I actually had this piece already properly bent. I'll show you how that clears everything coming up, clears the motor mounts and all of that as well. And then I'm able to retain just that stock cast upper catch point and a stock upper bushing. And so with that, again, the whole idea is to keep things serviceable, and that's gonna be an easy part to find, replace if needed. Suspension, that's pretty much it. With new tires comes new responsibilities, I think. I haven't cycled the suspension yet with the bigger tires on. I was only able to do that with the smaller tires, and so, you know, I need to check clearances. The important piece is I have the fenders on, so I need to make sure I'm going to clear all of this. One area I'm really concerned with is actually right in here. These rock rails were already welded on previously, but those new 35s come really close, so I think once I get the tire turned, I'm going to be rubbing this out, especially depending on how the suspension is going to cycle. So this next piece that we're going to talk about here is actually cycling that suspension. So we had to pull the tires off so that way it's supported on the jack stands. We're going to go ahead and remove the coil springs here on both sides, and then we're going to work to truly cycle out this suspension and make sure everything clears and fits with the tires mounted back on. So here we go. Okay. So I went ahead, we got, oh, can you see me? Yeah. All right, so we got everything supported, got the jack stands on each side. It's good and supported right now, so we'll be able to cycle that suspension. The only problem is with the coil springs in place, that's a no-go. So drooping this side completely out allows us to, as you can see, pull this coil spring out. Ta-da! And now we'll be able to cycle this side completely, bump all the way to what I assume will be droop without the tire in place. The biggest thing I'm really worried about is stuff. So once we'll leave this side probably alone, and then on that other side we'll put the tire back on, cycle it, steer, all those things, make sure everything kind of clears, and then go from there. There it is, look at that, boys. Coil spring all drooped out. I'm gonna have way more travel than I'm actually gonna use. I think I've determined with this, you know, and that's, I guess, another piece too, just to kind of mention here. I actually welded that Cherokee coil mount onto this coil tower, and then I bought these adjustable perches, in which it's great, but also that doesn't actually, one of the benefits of going with like a lift coil spring is that it's gonna be longer, and so it's not gonna completely unload like this when we're at full droop. And so actually installing a lift spring will be the final goal at some point, but for now I'll be able to see how much coil spring I actually need to purchase. So right now I have it about 1 inch. It's sitting about 1 inch too low in the front, so I need about 2 inches of lift in the front, and then I'll be able to fine tune it using these. So again, it's gonna be really nice that way, but this kind of shows you where I'm gonna have more travel than the coil spring is gonna want to allow, and that'll be one of the reasons we'll probably switch these coils out in the future. But for now, in the sake of budget builds, this is what we're sticking with. All right, now we got the coil spring removed. Yay. And it's time to get this axle jack back up. We'll get that tire thrown back on, get the steering cycled back and forth, make sure everything clears in regards to the fenders and the rock rails and the actual coil spring towers and all of those pieces. We need to make sure everything clears. And so that's where we're at. We'll just do a couple lug nuts this way. So this is currently where I have it set for full bump. I kind of talked through already how I did the bump stop mounting and where that's at. And so really I can cheat up probably another inch or two and up travel out of this, but I just need to make sure everything clears first. And this is the easiest way to set bump and the cheapest. You know, it was 15 bucks for the little bump stop pads that I chose to go with. You know, way cheaper than a lot of the other options out there. And really, I just want to make sure things work before I get extra carried away, spending a bunch of money making things extra complicated on the design. But there we are. That's full stuff right now, and I definitely feel like I'm going to need to make some adjustments on where the bump stops are placed. So I ran into this problem, as mentioned earlier, where when I was putting the suspension together the first time, I forgot to actually cycle the steering and the axle back and forth. So right now it's like, oh, this is great. Everything's looking pretty good, but I do think some of the issues are going to arise. Yep, right there. So when I turn full lock, you can see I'm getting into the fender, which that's going to be an easy thing to clearance out. Like that's not a problem at all to make clearance for that where it's rubbing. But also, if we look right up in here, this is going to be a big problem as well. It's getting really friendly with this coil tower. And so my options are either going to be to space this tire out further, or I'm going to have to, you know, be a little friendly here and trim off some more of this steel to really get that to clear. But so the fender, not worried about that. You know, if I get it to travel up more, that's just going to be chewing into this a lot more. So really this might be about where it's going to want to live in regards to full bump. So this is full compression, turned completely passenger, and you can see it's getting a little bit into this fender. So as I turn this back out, you know, it's gonna, I think that's not a problem because this is obviously not straight either, so I'll be hammering that out and making clearance. But that really doesn't leave us a whole lot more. You know, I don't love how big of a gap we have here. The previous owner hacked all this up, but at the same time, you know, I think when I build my tube fenders, I can kind of lower them down a little bit more and it'll still look really nice and complete. So now, if we turn it all the way to the driver's side, coming back here, oh, that makes me so happy. So that's looking great. We have full clearance, like, I mean, but we're talking, I mean, look at that. I mean, that's, I couldn't have planned that better, which I didn't plan it, but if I did, couldn't have done it better. So really, it's looking like we'll be just fine in regards to turning driver. It's just gonna be that passenger side that's gonna be the tricky part here because we aren't getting that full swing one way to the other. It looks like everything's gonna play nice for the most part for now, the way it's currently set up. Clear up the fender a little bit, and then I'll have to figure out what to do with this coil tower, which, I mean, it looks, if I'm feeling under here, looks like I can trim out quite a few inches. Let's look one more time. So right here where this discoloration is, it looks like I think I'm gonna be able to trim all this back just like that and make that radius a little, you know, half an inch, a quarter inch smaller. And I think that'll solve all the problems with clearance because, you know, all this will be gone. So that should be the solution that I'm gonna start with at least. Like I mentioned, I was hoping to get a little bit more up travel out of it, but honestly, this might be, even after I trim that might be the best I'm gonna be able to get. Not bad, easy fix, but definitely one of the issues that we're gonna have to look into resolving long term. That's looking pretty nice. So I'll probably still go ahead and trim this back just a little bit more just to make me feel better. But I mean, overall, I'd say that's looking pretty good. All right, so the suspension is mostly done. I really hope you enjoyed what we covered today. I hope I covered everything that you were hoping to learn. If you have any questions, make sure to comment below. I will leave a parts list of the items that were used on this so that you can know where to get those and what you might be looking for. So I know some of these parts can be hard to find, and sometimes, well, a lot of times, these things can be really expensive and stuff starts to add up really quickly. If you're wondering how I have been able to keep a lot of this cheap and stay within budget, some of the things I did, I ordered all of my parts during Black Friday, so I got 20% off on everything I could want and needed. I made sure to order in one shipment instead of lots of small shipments, so I saved on those shipping costs. And then also, I've just been scouring Facebook Marketplace a lot. So these adjustable coil spring mounts, I spent 50 bucks for those. Typically they're like $150, $200. And so that helped me save money. I reused a lot of those Cherokee parts. And so all of those things are saving me money in the long run and making this thing super affordable. If you've enjoyed today's video, I hope that you will like, subscribe, all those wonderful YouTube things that boost the algorithm for me. And until next time.